stuff, and he wanted to, and his son wanted his dad, which is the pastor, right, to chip in a little bit and help him out with with questions that he wanted. So one of the one of the kids asked him, well, his son is 18, so it's not. So one of the teenagers, right? So one of the questions they asked him, right? He asked, this was the question they asked. He asked him, how do I deal with a spiritual high, right? How we're trying to keep a fire going, right? A spiritual high, and how do I keep that going, in my faith, right? And he basically told him, he's like, that's not the question that needs to be answered. The question that needs to be answered is, we need to know, because we're at spiritual high, we can be at spiritual highs and we can be at spiritual lows. He's saying we need to know how to look for God in the lows, right? Now, hold on, let me go to my page, because I had my notes everywhere, y'all. when we look in the lows, right? So we need to know how to look for God when we're in the low seasons, right? Because here's the thing, he's here in the lows. He's also here in the highs, right? We're going to get to that point, okay? Bear with me. We're going to get to that point. But another thing he said, right, is when we look in the low, we only can go so low, right? When we're in that low season, we forget that we can look towards God, right? You can only go low for so long, right? That's why when we get broken down here in the lowness, we need to be looking for God. He's there with an open hand, right? In this season of low, because here's the thing. We like to think of, oh, this season low means that's Satan, right? And season high means that's automatically God. But that's the thing. God is always here. The high praise. Also, he's here, low praise. He's got hands on both, right? And we get rid of that line for some reason, right? So that was the first few points that stuck out to me, right? And let me see what's next. What's next on the list? Let's go. All right, so let's go back to verse 1. So verse 1 says, "In my distress, I called to the Lord, and He answered me." All right, and one thing is, he answered me, right? Go to verse 2, which says, "Lord, rescue me from lying lips and a deceitful tongue." Okay, so another points that stuck out to me when he was talking about this is, if you procrastinate your praises, right, or your peace until the situation is perfect, you will never get the peace, right? Some of us like to wait for the right moments to be worshiping God, right? That comes back to the ways of how to grow closer with God, right? This is how we can connect it to that, right? Some of y'all wait until the right moments to I'm gonna thank God now for what He's doing in my life, when you should be thanking God for everything that's going on in your life, the highs and the lows. When you're high on the mountain and you're low in the valleys, right? You gotta be thanking God for every single moment. He has His hand on every single moment. But boom, this is where your faith is getting tested. Where are you with your faith with God? Right? Are you still having faith in the valley? Right? When He still has a hand on that. Right? And what's the psalm when in the valley I fear, in the shadow of death I fear no evil? Do you really fear no evil when you're in that valley? Do you have the faith to know that He is there the whole time with a hand on this situation? Right? That's what draws the line from that high to that low. Faith. Where does your faith align? Right? And that's where the devil is going to try to tweak, right here on that line. And that's where he gets us to think that it's Him down here and there is no God down here. But God in reality is down there. But you got to have trust and faith to believe that line, right? The faith, right? That was another thing that stuck out to me. Okay. Now, another point that he said, right, is we're going off of that. Let's go here. I said, sometimes The moments of our victory make us more vulnerable than the moments of defeat. Think about that. Your blessings. Well, let me continue this off before I continue. And then continue off of that, right? In the moments of defeat, you depend on God more often, right? Right? We do that, right? But sometimes in the moments of victory, we pretend like it wasn't, that God wasn't the one who gives us that, right? This is another way the enemy tries to trick us through our minds, through our hearts and trust in the Lord, right? You are more vulnerable in those moments of when, oh, you get these blessings and all this stuff, right? You forget who gave it to you. And that's where Satan likes to take over in those certain moments, right? Gives you those thoughts like, no, yeah, you did all this by yourself, right? You got that job by yourself, right? You won that race by yourself, right? You won that basketball game. You won that football game. You won all that stuff by yourself, right? That's where the enemy likes to get you, right there when they're vulnerable with the moments, right? Where you can't depend, where he wants you not to depend on God in those moments. That's where we gotta be careful. Gotta be careful from those moments, right? That's why you have to be depending on God, not in the moments where you need him, when your life is not going good, right? You gotta depend on him in those moments, and also depend on him in the high moments as well, too. And that comes revolving back to the faith. The faith of both the valley and both the mountains, right? Okay, that was another thing that had stuck out to me. Now, I believe after this, we're going to get into my valley point. I want to say, let me check my time. Where we're at on my time. Look, we're finna make a part 2. All right? Part 2, y'all. We're finna make part 2.